Hey guys, Brian here from Better Chess Training, and in today's video, we are continuing our series on Tal. In this game, he takes on a young Bobby Fischer on his road to the World Championship. So, in this second game that we are presenting with Tal's game, he is playing a future world champion at this time, Bobby Fischer, and this is from the candidates tournament in 1959. And here it was eight of the best players in the world playing multiple round robin. Pal ended up winning this by 20 out of 28 games, 20 points out of 28 games to become the challenger for Mikhail Botvinnik. In this tournament, Fischer, remember, he was fairly young at this point. I think he was 15, 16 at this point. Was sixth out of eight. So, but not a bad result. He had 8 wins and losses. But for a teenager playing against the world's best, definitely not bad showing. And as we know from history, about a decade later, would have his chance. Or about 12 years later, I guess. In any case, let's start this game off. Tal had the white pieces. Bobby Fischer had black. And D4, knight to F6, C4, and G6. And here we're going to be heading towards the King's Indian. As we know, or we may know, later in his career, Fischer started to prefer the Grunfeld. But here the King's Indian defense was his favorite in his younger years. Okay, knight to C3, bishop to G7, E4, E6, bishop to E2. Of course, usual here is knight to F3, but we'll see that it transposes shortly. Here comes that knight to F3 and E5. So this is the classical response of the King's Indian, and black plays E5, just closing off the center here, and then we will soon see the typical plans in the King's Indian. Knight B to D7, and bishop to G5. This is the Petrosian variation against the King's Indian defense. And the general idea behind this move is the pinning this knight just puts a little monkey wrench in black's typical plan, which would be to move this knight and then at some point press on with F5. This is the typical plan in a lot of the King's Indian variations. So this pin just is a little annoyance, and of course we'll see later how black gets out of it. And we'll also see later the typical King's Indian plans where white will attack on the queen side with b4 and c5, and eventually black will counterattack here with f5. So a lot of black's play is on the king side, a lot of white's play is on the queen side, and a lot depends on the efficiency of each side's ability to push forward with their plan. So we'll see that here leads to a lot of sharp fights. King's Indian is one of the most exciting openings to play with both sides. And here we have two really great players. Tal also played the King's Indian defense with white. And of course, Fischer, being Fischer, is one of the greatest proponents of the King's Indian defense. So we have a very sharp matchup. I really enjoyed this game, which is why I'm showing it to you. Okay, let's keep going. H6, pushing the bishop back. And here A6 is played. And the general idea here is that black is going to unpin with queen to E8. But if he plays it too quickly, like right here, then knight to B5, targeting C7, be quite annoying. So A6, pretty necessary here and pretty normal. Okay, knight to D2. And here we have queen to E8, unpinning. So now this knight can move and black can get on with his plans. Okay, white castles, knight to H7. And here we see F5 is going to be coming soon. B4. And here, knight to G5. And just to show you here, F5 here doesn't quite work out. with f5, then e takes f5, g takes f5, and bishop to h or h5, and black is going to lose some material trying to protect this queen. So another plan here that black sometimes play is trying to trade off these dark square bishops, because this bishop here is a bad bishop. Sometimes it can get opened up after f5 and some exchanges in the center, but this would be a reasonable plan as well. But after bishop takes f6 and knight takes f6, we see that this f7 pawn hasn't moved yet, and black's going to waste time trying to get it free. So instead, knight to g5, which is going to help participate in some offensive offensive operations, I guess you could say here. Potential to hit any of these key squares. Okay, f3. And Tal in his book gives bishop takes g5, g5, and g4. And he says this also is decent because it actually stifles the f5 thrust, but the problem is he felt that it limited him as well. So part of the game here, and this is kind of the counterplay or the balance that has to be struck in openings like the King's Indian, is keeping lines open enough so that you can attack while keeping your opponent's own attacking ideas at bay. So that's kind of the beauty of this opening. So let's keep going here. So he preferred f3 at this point. Okay, f5 is played. Okay, and then here we see why f3 is played. Now bishop to f2 can come back here and help out here with this c5, this eventual c5 pawn lever, as well as protect the king somewhat. Okay, queen to e7, again eyeing that c5 square. Okay, rook c1, and we can see now how this battle is playing out here. One thing to note is here, Tal gives after f4 that white's play is much better, and we can see that it's actually pretty devastating here. c5, and if d takes c5, queen to b3 with this nasty discovered check threatened, and if the king gets out of the way, b takes c5, and we see now we have these open lines here, as well as these potential breaks here in the center, while black, because he played f4, is totally closed off his play here, and it's too slow. White has a dominating position here. So instead, Fischer didn't do that. Now, there are some variations where f4 is played, and sometimes those would be ideas when, for example, if the bishop were on e3. So with f4, if black could actually gain a tempo, and usually follow up with something like g4 or g5 and then g4 with that pawn storm on the king side. But you can see here with the knight on g5 that isn't possible for black. So instead, knight to f6, he's going to attack the king side with his pawn or with his pieces. And here c5 is played, and Fischer responds with bishop to d7 and queen to c2. And now here we're playing against both f5 here as well as the opening of these lines. Okay, knight to h5 is played. And here Tal makes an interesting decision. Let me show you what some of the ideas he did have. He felt that c takes d5 would be a mistake here, because after c takes d5 and knight to c4, with the idea of taking over here on b6, black's attack comes very quickly. So let me show you the rest of his variations. F takes e4, f takes e4, and here knight to f4 brings this knight to a very dominant position. If knight to b6, then we have this piece sacrifice, knight to h3 check, g takes h3, knight to h3 check, and here um, to d2 or king to g2 is pretty forced. If king to h1, then we have knight takes f2 check could be pretty deadly. But king to g2 and then rook takes f2, rook takes f2, and here queen to g5 check is just devastating. Black's going to either win a lot of material or checkmate. Checkmate. Actually, I think if you can avoid checkmate with something like bishop to g4, but you're going to lose a lot of material. However, if we move to f1, then we have queen to g1, checkmate. And of course, if we move to h1, we have the f2 checkmate. So, okay, actually, if we go back to the earlier part of this variation, there is a way for white to improve on the variation that Tal gave here. And after c takes, or c takes d6, c takes d6, knight to c4, f takes e4, instead of playing f takes e4, white can play knight takes e4. And after exchanging knights and knight to f4, I think that white is okay here. After knight to b6, black does have a resource here. Knight takes e2 check. After queen takes e2, bishop to b5. And here, although black is going to win in exchange, um, it, white has a lot of activity. This knight is very strong. This rook on the c file is very strong. So I think that white will have compensation. So that's where that line can be improved. So let's go back to the game here. After knight to h5, Tal actually plays a provocative move. He actually gives it a dubious mark, but I don't think it's actually too bad after analyzing it a little bit. It's b5, and here he's trying to create a little complexity. So sometimes I think that Tal enjoyed, of course, he did a lot of calculation. Of course, he was very strong at calculation, but I think part of his strength as a player is being able to create these chaotic positions. So here you could see there's a lot of pawns in contact with each other, and his ability to create these positions and maybe dare his opponent to enter, as he talks about, enter the forest with him. And usually, or many times, he's the only one who comes out, even with players as strong as Bobby Fischer. Even here, the young Fischer was already one of the top players in the world. So after b5, f takes e3, and here we have that knight takes e4, knight takes e4, and f takes e4 here. And here we have that knight dropping into f4 as we've seen before. So here, Fischer increases the complexity of the game here with, or I'm sorry, Tal increases the complexity of the game here with c6, forcing some exchanges. But of course, Fischer finds a great move here, queen to g5, uh, threatening checkmate. So bishop to f3 is played, and now he takes b takes c6, and here d takes c6. Now, in this position, I think d takes c6 was a great move. The idea here, by he opens this diagonal here, and also it creates more keeps tension between some of these pawns, and also creates the ability for white to have some dynamic chances because of more open lines, as well as generally a sharper position. Let me just compare that real quick with this move here. B takes c6, and here after knight to f3 check, for example, king to h1, and here bishop to g4 just allows white to trade down, for example, or black to trade down. For example, if we, of course, taking this knight would be bad here with this checkmate, but if bishop takes, then knight takes f2 check first, after rook takes f2, rook takes f2, queen takes f2, then we have queen to c1 check. So see here that after this bishop to g4, we can't take here on g4. So best would probably play g3, covering the f2 square with the bishop. And after bishop takes f3, rook takes f3, rook takes f3, and e takes f3, we could see here that the game is kind of fizzling out a little bit. I wouldn't say it's totally dead, but we can see as the pieces get traded off that there are less winning chances for both sides. Of course, this game, I mean, both of them being very strong players, both increases that fact, but also if they wanted to play this type of position, there would still be more moves to be played. But I think in any case, the expected result from this position would probably be a draw. So let's go back. And here, white played d takes c6. Okay. Black plays bishop to g4, looking to trade off this defending bishop. Bishop takes g4, queen takes g4 again, threatening mate. And now bishop to d3 allows this queen to defend here along second rank. This bishop also attacks the knight on f4. So a takes e5, reasonable move here, and bishop takes f4. Black's knight was its most active piece, and here we're setting up for a showdown or a battle between white's knight and black's dark square bishop. Okay, e takes f4, opening this bishop. And here, knight takes b5. Now we're putting pressure on the c7 pawn. Rook to f7, defending here along the second rank. And queen to c4. Strong move, pinning this rook as well as now allowing this knight to take on c7. So black has to play his rook back to c8. But here we have rook to f3, blockading this pawn, and also now this rook can move along the third rank. But I think I would guess the main reason actually is to just blockade this pawn with the potential for either bringing the rook, the other rook over to f1, or like I said before, this rook swinging over h-file, or maybe over to the queen side if needed. Okay, bishop to e5, adding a little more protection to this pawn. And we'll see here there's a few variations where this pawn either gets traded or can advance, and now this bishop is very active in attacking white's king. Okay, rook to f1. And here we're seeing putting more pressure here. King to g7, just getting out of this pin. And here a4, advancing the passed pawn. So we can see here that material's even, but white has this passed pawn, so he's going to start pushing it. Now, if you look at this position in an engine, it is considered pretty equal overall, and I think it is equal. But as we mentioned earlier, both of these players like to play very sharp, very concrete positions. So it gets very complicated coming up soon. And here we're entering into the final phase of the game. And we'll see that it's really just one, maybe two inaccuracies by black that's going to allow white enough room to gain an advantage. So let's keep moving here. Rook to a8, just stopping this pawn from advancing. And king to h1. Just getting out of the way of any potential checks along this diagonal or any potential pins along the g-file. Okay, queen to g5. And here, this is the first inaccuracy. So let's go back here. what is wrong with this move? And I had to play around with this a little bit. And the idea here is that black can create kind of a dynamic equilibrium by uh, continuing to add pressure or continuing to push on white's position while white pushes back. So if they can keep that equilibrium, then even though it's a very complex position, it's what they call dynamically balanced. And the only way for black to do that is play queen to h5. Now, you could say it's only one square different, but here's the difference. It's this potential attack against white's king. And here, I'm just going to give you a few variations, did a little bit of analysis on this, but I don't want to get too lost in the variations. And here, the idea is at some point, black wants to break through with g3. And in this case, rook can just come back here. And I'll just give you an example where this can go wrong. After g takes f4, rook takes f4, and after a few exchanges here, bishop takes f4, now threatens mate. So white has to respond to this. Queen to d4 check works, but after bishop to e5, we're still threatening mate. Queen to f2, protecting, and here d5. Now what does this do? Well, after e takes d5 and queen to d1 check, we see here that black's basically going to win a couple pawns. After queen to g2, or I'm sorry, king to g2, we have queen takes e5 check. If we blocked here with the queen, then that would not work either. Queen to g1, and then your queen takes d5 check or queen to f3 check is also not good. Let me just show you this line. Queen takes d5 check, and queen to g2. After queen to d1 check, then we can grab the 4 pawn. Now black black just has a lot of pressure, and this is probably a losing game for white with someone of Fischer's capability. Anyways, let's go back here to this position, and um, here it probably is equal as long as white again doesn't attack here. But you can see how sharp it is because there really isn't too many moves. For example, white can play something like queen to g2, just stepping out of this pin, but maintaining this tension here. And then if this exchange happens, then here this ends up being turns the table. So really a lot of tension that has to be maintained because it's so sharp on both sides. Okay, let's go back here. Queen to h5. What white can do here is, and again, I did use the computer to help me with some of these moves. The g3 move I saw because it seemed like a natural move and saw why that didn't quite work out so well. Rook to h3, attacking the queen instead. Here we have queen to g4, and here this is also equal maintained and maintaining again the equilibrium because there isn't much better that that white can do here to kind of change the status of this position. So let's go back to queen to g5, and here is the problem with that is that now white can play g3 here. And of course we can't take because this pawn is pinned. So rook to f8 like we saw in the previous variation. And now we can take on f4, okay? Because after bishop takes f4, we now have, well, we have an interesting variation here. The knight comes in from b5, and now if you take a look here, we have some interesting forking ideas. So here we're threatening knight to e6 check, forking the king and the queen. So the queen moves to h4. Can you see now how if the queen were already on h5, this would not be as big of a problem? Of course, who knows if they were either in time trouble or, of course, it was several moves away that we see the threat. So it just takes a small inaccuracy in these sharp openings. Okay, rook takes. Okay, rook takes, and then knight to e6 check. Where the king goes to g8 to avoid any discoveries or other dangerous moves. Here, queen to d4 check. So black has to block with the rook, and here we just take back. So now white is a piece ahead, and after king to h8, getting out of the pin, we have another great move, e5, just attacking this rook. And after black takes and queen to d7 check, black resigned. See why it's going to be, for example, if just to show you here, rook to f7, it's mate 2 with knight g6 8. And otherwise, if the king moves somewhere like say g8, then queen to d8 check will eventually lead to a mating attack, or at least a big loss of material for black in any case. So, hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that game. It's one of my favorites of Tal's. It actually showed me how good of a chess player he was, because I always thought of him as this kind of swashbuckling, sacrificial player who didn't play sound chess. But this game showed me that he really knew quite a bit about chess. Actually, I knew that, but I think you generalize players a lot, and I really thought that both strategically and tactically he was very, very strong in this game, and it was very entertaining as well as instructive to watch for me. So if you want, you can check out the first game I did on Tal last week. Check out that video here, and stay tuned coming weeks for the rest of my series on Tal. I hope you have a great day, and as always, good luck with your chess.